Welcome everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so you can see the PowerPoint. You are attending today Fractions, Building a Strong Foundation in the K2 Classroom. And we'll go ahead, and I am Vonda Adams, and I am a math consultant with Kentucky Valley Educational Cooperative. First of all, I want to talk about fractions in the kindergarten classroom. Now, that I've pulled up the standard for kindergarten, and it's titled Geometry. Actually, there are no fraction standards that are titled fractions in K1 or 2, but there are lots of standards that build toward working with fractions once the students enter that third grade. So that's the purpose of this session today, is talk about building that foundation. So first of all, let's look at that K standard. It's geometry, and it says compose simple shapes to form larger shapes. So what we can do is we can have our kids work with just simple shapes, like it said. Now we have pattern blocks in our classroom, and hopefully, Lord willing, when we get back in our classroom, you can work with your students with this. But until then, you can with the kids. This is actually a printable that you can share with your parents. So there's a link. If they have access to a printer, they could print those, and the kids could use these while at home. And of course, that link will be at the end of this PowerPoint, and I will share that with everyone that has joined us today. So, but first of all, let's look at these pattern blocks. And bear in mind, of course, they could be the paper ones. So with these pattern blocks, what we want to do is we want to see if our kids can take these shapes and then work with them to form other shapes. And now some of them will want to build it beside of it, and some of them will want to lay it right on top to make sure it matches. Of course, when we're working with our kids, we talk about how many it took, how many triangles it took to form this rhombus. And of course, we look at the hexagon, and you can talk about how many trapezoids it would take to build that hexagon, and that type of thing. So that's something you can have the kids work on. And of course, if you're working with students that may not be in kindergarten, but they may be working at a kindergarten level with this concept. So there's nothing wrong with using these tools with their kids. We meet them where they're at, right? So another thing you could do with this standard is something that parents may have at home, hopefully would have. And if they don't have index cards, then you can, they can just use sheets of paper. But they'll just line them up. This is 2 sheets that I've put together. You just line them up, and you just cut off corners. Notice I'm cutting them at different angles and different sizes. And what you do is you just let the kids then work with those. They're like little puzzle pieces, and see if they can form rectangles out of them with these pieces. And they just piece them together to form those rectangles. So just a simple activity you can share with your kiddos at home right now. And like I said, when we get back in that classroom, it's a great activity for there as well. So the next thing I want to share with you on this one comes from KCM, Kentucky Center for Mathematics, and I will share their site with you also. I have all those things at the end of the presentation. but they actually have lots of printables that are available for you. So this is one of them from their fraction squares series that they have. And it's working with fraction squares. And fraction squares, you'll see, I'm going to have to remove this so I can lay these down for you to look at it. But you'll see kind of what it looks like, and then I'll just read it for you. So fraction squares are like this. And they just come in, they're just squares that are in different pieces, as you can see. Okay, so the first one said, first of course, they always make predictions, and they want them to predict it will take how many brown pieces to equal one blue square. So they take out that blue square, they look at it, they look at those brown pieces, and then they predict. And then after they predicted, then they build to see. And of course, they just lay them right on top. And as of course, you can see that it takes 2 of those to form that. Now, you see how this is working up to fractions, that square, 2 equal parts. We divide it into 2 equal parts. If we did, that's what they would look like. So we're building on that fraction foundation. So that's an activity, like I said, it's called fraction squares, how many, and it goes through a whole series of things that you could do with them. So the next one here we go, is a first grade standard. And it says those shapes. So you see we're building. So we're going to compose 2-dimensional shapes to create rectangles, squares, trapezoids, triangles, half circles, quarter circles, and composite shapes to choose new shapes from the composite shapes. So basically what that's saying is that we're just building shapes. We're taking shapes, like I showed you earlier with the pattern blocks, and then we are just creating new shapes out of those bits and pieces of them. Okay, so the first, and you'll notice down here, I have listed the K and P sites, the activities that would actually go along with this. And then I also have, get my little pointer here. I also have suggested resources for at home, for when our kiddos are at home and we're having to work with them virtually. So you'll find that on each of the slides as well. I forgot to mention that on the kindergarten one. So the next activity I want to share with you from the KMP site is the rods and strips one. So the rods and strips one looks a lot like the other one did, like the fraction squares did, but it's using Cuisenaire rods. Now Cuisenaire rods like this. And again, they're predicting. It says, I think it will take blank red rods to equal one brown rod. So they take that brown rod and they look at those red rods and see how many they think it may take. Of course, they can always predict first and then build. And of course, they could check and see that if their answer is correct. So you get the idea of how you would do that activity. And there's lots of them for them, as you can see, for the kids to build and explore. And of course, we know that's the way our kids learn best, is by using those tools that we put in their hands in the classroom. And of course, the great thing about the KMP site is if you don't have access to those Cuisenaire rods, you can actually use this little template that they give you to use if you want to print those off and cut them apart and let the kids use them that way, build with them that way. So that is from the KMP site, like I said, and I will share that with you in a bit. I also want to talk to you about If you'll notice over here, I had put, we could use these paper plates as, and of course I've got the blocks, the pattern blocks again as well. That's what I'm referring to there with that, this one down here. So also you could use paper plates. Now most parents will have paper plates in their home more than likely, and what they can do is they can just have that, take that paper plate, and they can ask the kiddos to cut it into 2 parts. And if they can't do that, then they could cut them for them. And then of course they can talk about how that, you know, that's a half a circle. And if we put 2 half circles together, then we get a whole circle. And then of course you'll notice over here where it talked about quarter circles. Then you also could take that paper plate and you could cut it into quarters. And of course they can piece it back together and talk about how that it takes 4 quarters to make that whole. Right? So another activity that parents could use, could do with their kiddos at home. So I'm going to stop for just a minute. Is there any questions? Anything anyone would like to ask or comment? Maybe just a little bit of wait time here. Okay, if not, we'll move on. And we're still in the first grade with this one. And this, of course, is a geometry standard. But as you can see, it's going to build toward those that understanding of fractions and equal parts. So it says to partition circles and rectangles into 2 and 4 equal parts. Describe the shares using the words. Now, it says using the words. We are not writing the symbols with these kiddos. They're too young to understand that. Think about it. They're first graders. They're just now understanding whole numbers. We cannot confuse them by trying to have them write those symbols for our fractions, but they can use those words and they can understand the words. So they're using halves and fourths and quarters, and of course use the phrases of half of, fourth of, quarter of, and of course describe the whole as 2 or 4 of the shares. And the demonstration I just gave you earlier with the paper plate also works here with this one. And of course we want them to understand for these examples that decomposing into more equal shares creates smaller shares. So that's the biggie with this one, is the wording and how the more shares we have, the smaller the shares are. So again, we're going to look at some K&P activities. We're going to look at another one with fraction squares. So here with fraction squares, we have a sorting mat they've given us. And then there's a little activity that we're going to do with that sorting mat. And the site actually provides these printables for you that can be printed out in cardstock. If you'll notice, of course, this could be something done on just index cards. So what they do is you have a dice for this particular activity. You have a dice, and like I said, it could be just a regular plain dice, but this one, of course, I've drawn little people on it. And what you do is you roll the dice, and you see that, and of course it says the number of people that you're going to share my cake with. So I'm going to share with 2. So I take my marker here, and of course these are laminated, so I can write on those. And of course, obviously, that's not going to be something probably that's at home, so I can just use crayons, pencils, markers, whatever, to share their parts. So we're going to share this cake equally with 2. And of course, when you're doing this in a classroom with the kiddos, you want to be okay with it. You know, obviously it's hard to get it perfect. And if they want to use a ruler or a straight edge, you could do that as well to straighten it up for them. This would be one way that someone may say, is it fair or is it not fair? And then the kids decide if it's fair or not. And then, of course, sometimes the kiddos may have a hard time with that, understanding fair share. And you may get something like this, and you have to decide, okay, where are we going to put that? I'm going to have to put that one over here because that's not a fair share. And, of course, there's always those non-traditional ways of sharing with a fair share. It's not always the traditional way that we think about it. Great activity for the kids to do. Just putting things into fair shares. So our next one, also coming from that KNP guide, is titled Rods and Strips. And with rods and strips, what you actually do is work with adding machine tape. And of course, adding machine tape may not be readily available at homes, but we can. I mean, think about it. Adding machine tape is just a receipt. So parents probably have receipts that they could use for this. So what you do with your adding machine tape, of course, you have the vocabulary here. It says, get a strip of adding tape about 12 to 18 inches long. And then this strip is about the length of your paper. Of course, it talks about how this is the hole, the adding machine tape. And it says, fold the paper in half, crease, and then open. So they just take that paper, they fold it in half and crease it, and then they open it. And then you talk about, okay, how many parts do you see? Okay, so we see that there are now 2 parts. And it says, choose a vocabulary word from above that names one part. So if we look at this, the kids can see, okay, that means that this is a half and this is a half, so they would write the word half in there. Of course, if we don't have this paper like readily available, then the parents can just talk to them about it, or you can talk to them about it virtually. It'd be even better. So then you fold the paper back in half, and then in half again. And then we open that up. And then you may, it's hard for the kiddos to see, something they can actually do is they can just take a marker or a pencil and they can draw on those lines so they can see what they're getting now. You can see, okay, now how many pieces, how many parts do we have? And you can see there are 4. And then they talk about what words up there might describe 4 parts. Would be a fourth or a quarter. Then, of course, it talks about how many fourths are in 1/2. So if you look at just half of it, how many fourths are there? You see that they can see that there are 2. You see how this is working on them understanding that the more parts, the smaller the parts. And that's, of course, that's what we want our kiddos working on. And of course, it goes on to fold again, and they'll discover the 8ths as well.
Miss Vonda, if they don't have paper, they could always use string or yarn.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Stephanie, for adding, for making that point. You're right. And I was thinking I should have put on there as well, or ribbon, or, for crafters that have ribbon or something like that. Yeah, just anything that they could fold and crease would be best, but as long as we can get it into parts. And of course, also I've added this to the end too that could be used as well to compare and work with, just like we did with our Cuisinart rods or with these strips, and they compare the parts. And this will be at the end of the presentation as well, a link that you can just click on. Okay, anything else with that? Any other comments, any other ideas? If you have suggestions, then by all means, please share. Okay, so we'll move on into our second grade standards. And looking at this second grade standard, it says to partition circles and rectangles into 2, 3, and 4 equal shares. Describe the shares using the words halves, thirds, third of, and describe the whole as 2 halves, 3 thirds, 4 fourths. And recognize that equal shares of identical wholes need not have the same shape. Okay, so if you'll remember back to the paper plates, that's another activity that you could do with your paper plates to do that. Also using those receipts again is something we could do again. We've already talked about fraction squares, but it does actually address this standard with point 1. Point 2, is it fair, is the one I want to share with you. So with is it fair, what they do is they give you this from KMP. It's just a little guide for the kids. And they put their little rule card, and all these things are accessible there online. So they put the little rule card there, and they just sort through these cards and decide, is it fair? Does this, of course the rule here says card that shows halves, cards that do not show halves. So they just go through the cards, and you can see they would have to decide where this one goes. And then we'll look at this one. And of course, if you're sitting with your kids, you talk about why that's not showing halves. It's 2 parts, but why isn't that halves? And of course, they talk about how that has to be equal parts. And here, looking at this one's showing equal parts, but there's 3 and not 2. So you can see there's great conversation can come out of these with the kiddos. Again, there's 2 but not equal parts. Here we go. Here's this one with 2 equal parts. This one 2 equal parts. Notice how the shapes are different. And this one 2 equal parts. And that's, great activities. And there's several in this, 6 or 7 different sets that you can do with this one activity. Great station activity for your kiddos when you get back into that classroom. So the next one I want to share with you is also from there, but it's using rods and strips. Same principle. Is it fair? It has the little card showing halves. I just want to show you a different way to look at it. This one, of course, you just talk about yes or no, why not. Same thing here. Do you get the idea? Just a different way for the kiddos to look at it. Of course, here you see they're looking at different sizes even. All right. So, something I was thinking about with our kids, and they love to do this with fractions. We did this a lot when I was in the classroom with my kiddos, and you'd bring in treats and you'd talk about fair shares and those types of things. So I have borrowed some donuts from my husband, and we're going to talk about fair share here. And so you can have the kiddos, you can talk at the home, the parents can take these, of course it can be donuts, it can be brownies, it can be cookies, anything that they can cut into fair shares. It can be a piece of bologna as far as that goes, anything to cut into those fair shares. So we're going to cut this one into 2 equal parts. You can see we put that back together to form one whole, so it's 2 parts make one whole. This one, I want to cut it into fourths. So we cut it into halves first, and then back this way again. And you can see that now I have 4 parts. And then of course you could go on and on with it. So just a way to do this at home that parents can actually get involved with your kids and work with them that way. Okay, so our last one that I want to share with you, oh no, it's showing my internet's unstable. The last one I want to share with you is probably one of my favorite entries with the K&P guides with fractions, and it is one dealing with the number line. And of course, you'll see how this number line, how this standard is leading into, over here's our coherence. I had forgotten to mention that earlier, I apologize. But this is the coherence, so when you go back and look, you can see how the standards lead into each other. This standard, even though it's measurement and data, leads right into the fractions standard in the 3rd grade. So here we're going to talk about where on the number line. So where on the number line also is from that K&P guide. And all it really is just a number line. And this particular number line starts at 0 and ends at 10, has that tick mark in the middle. Notice it's not labeled for our kiddos. And then on the other side, when you flip it, it goes from 0 to 10. So what's cool about this is you hold this up. This is the side that the kiddos see. And you ask them, show me where you think 5 would be, just to see if they understand where that tick mark would be. So they take that paper clip and they put it on there. And then all they have to do is flip and check, and they can see that they're right on the money with that one. Okay? It's a little harder when you're asking them to find other places. Now, if someone's not sitting with them, then they actually can just draw cards. Okay, so if you want to draw, say, a number 3, and we'll try to figure out where we think a number 3 with this. Okay, so we know that's 0, we know that's 5. So we're going to think, hopefully, that 3, and I'm not the best in the world at this, so we'll see what we can get. The 3 would possibly be in this area. I didn't do very well when I practiced earlier. So there we go, getting it right on the money. So this is a really great activity for the kids to do. Now, obviously this is something that's a printable, that's on that site, but think about it. You take an index card, do the same thing. You could show them how to mark it this way, then they could guess and check. Super fun for the kids. They really enjoy this one. Now, some things you might be at home that you might could use. Of course, obviously the paper and the scissors to cut things with. You could use a ruler. You could use a tape measure for those of us that are crafters. Yardstick. You could take this tape measure. I have the kiddos do the same thing. You could flip it over. You could tell them mark off where 0 and 10 would be and ask them to find the middle where 5 would be, those types of things. Obviously, it's easier if we just use that paper and pencil. Alrighty, so let's talk about these resources I promised I'd share with you. So first of all, I want to share with you the Kentucky Academic Standards, where those standards actually came from. So I'm going to get rid of my little pointer here. And let's look at the standards. So we're exploring our standards here. We go down to our math standards. And you can scroll. I'm not going to scroll and make everyone sick from it. If you're looking for, let's say grade 3, let's look at grade 3 because I wanted to show you all how where we're getting at. So you just click on that little page, it takes you right there, and we will scroll down. We can get into those fractions in just a bit. Here we go. So here's our fractions. As you can see how this standard right over here in the coherence, we can see how that standard is a second grade standard, which leads into that third grade standard, which leads into that fourth grade standard with the one that we just worked on here. Okay, finding those whole numbers, first of all, that's how we start out, right? Same thing here, leading into those other standards. So I just wanted to show you briefly what that looks like. And of course, always those mathematical practices, which are all so important in all of our standards, are there. And the coherence is there for us to see what leads into what and what came prior to that. And of course, there's always that clarification for us. Okay. So here's the one I promised I'd show you, the K&P guide. That's where a lot of these activities have come from. Here we go. So this is what it looks like if you go to their homepage. And I'm going to scroll down, and they have some awesome resources on here. They have been doing a lot of work virtually to help meet the needs of our teachers and our students. So I suggest that you get on here and check out some of their stuff because it's awesome stuff. But I'm going to scroll down and show you the K&P guide, the intervention guide. Here we go. Okay, so I'd already logged in, so it went straight to it. But when you open up, it'll ask you to log in, and all you have to do is put in your email, and you type in, the username is Bluegrass, and the password is math. And you can get right into that. So we're going to search this intervention guide. I like to search by task group. You can see it's by standard. If you got a particular standard you want to find something for. And these are for up through third grade, basically, is what these standards go through, from K to 3. Looking at this task group, I'm going to scroll down to those fractions and show you that's where I was at earlier. And I showed you 0.0 earlier, which was how many, 0.1, which was I can share, 0.2, is it fair? When we get into 0.3, 0.4, and 0.5, that's where we're getting into those third grade fraction standards. So you can see 0, 1, and 2, they were just building on that standard. But I want to open this one up to let you see what it looks like. Lots of great information on here. There's a lesson plan. We'll open that up. So the lesson plan is there for you. There's a direct link to your printables. You can go to it that way, or you can get to it this way. And with those printables, it's any of those documents that you may need. I'm going to open up one that shows a little more with the printables for you. So let's go to, is it fair? And look at their printables. So you can see it gave us the place card holder. And then here's all those sets of cards. Remember I told you there were several sets. There's set A, there's set B, which works on the fourths. And then set C, thirds. Set D, eighths, as you can see. And then here's a really good one where it gets into asking if it's half or not. And it's those different shapes that it's looking at. Okay. So, awesome resource. And as you can see, when I go back here, it addresses many things, not just fractions, many things. Multiplication, number ID, addition and subtraction, tons of resources that are out there for you to use that are free. And of course, I always put a plug in for them because it's an awesome group. The more we use this site, the more likely it is to stay alive because it comes from government funding, state funding. And so the more evidence they have that teachers are using it, the more likely when they go to lobby every year for it to be put into that budget, back their funding will. So I strongly encourage you to use it. So, like I said, I've got printables on here. That's the pattern blocks, the fraction strips. I've got a colored one and the black line, whichever you prefer to use. Because lots of times I didn't like to have the color for my kiddos. I'll show you here how to get to that real quick. It's pretty simple. You just open it up and you can print it here. But lots of times I didn't like for my kiddos to have those colors to rely on. It's okay for a while, but when you want to remove that scaffold, it's good. It's nice to have that black and white as well. So that's the purpose in sharing that with you. Now, here's an awesome site. Stephanie and I love this site. Not only do they have awesome materials, they have an awesome virtual site for us to use. So you can see there's tons of stuff on here, but for our purposes today, I want to show you the pattern blocks. So here are these pattern blocks. Remember how I was building earlier and trying to see how many trapezoids it would take to make a hexagon? Well, this tool is awesome. Of course, our kiddos love technology. Come on. They're probably a whole lot better at it than what I am. So it's pretty cool the way they can use that. And of course, they can do the same thing with the rhombus and the triangles, or they can actually see how many triangles it would take to build that hexagon, predict first and then build. It's a great tool, great site for kids to use. Okay, and then here's another I wanted to share with you. This is just a little one from Room Recess, working with fractions. Of course, they can build that whole, and then they can predict how many halves does it take to equal the whole. They can line it up right underneath, and how many fourths. And we talk about how many fourths does it take to equal a half. So lots of good conversation can come out of that between the parents and the students while they're at home, and of course when we get back in that classroom. And then here's another. The math is fun. It's designed more for a higher level, but what I liked about it was that, of course, kiddos love to work with the pieces, and you can change the number of slices to whatever you'd like to change it to, and they can notice how that the fewer the slices, the bigger the pieces, and more slices we have, the smaller the piece gets. And they can also do that with the circle and then with the square. And what's cool about this is they can just build. So if we want to have this in fourths, so we can look and see what 2/4 actually look like. So it's an awesome tool there as well for us to use. Thank you for attending Fractions, Building a Strong Foundation in the K2 Classroom. If you'd like further information about this topic, please feel free to contact me at vonda.adams@perry.kyschools.us or 606-497-6025.